Have you ever had an HOA make a request that's just too much? Well, that's exactly what happened to me. I'm talking about my HOA demanding that I give them the keys to my private gate, just so they could use my driveway whenever they wanted. Now, I don't know about you, but I value my privacy and having someone drive through my property whenever they please. No thanks. But the worst part, they said it would help them move traffic along faster, as if they had the right to use my space whenever it suited them. So, after some serious thought, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I mean, I wasn't about to let them walk all over me, right? I needed a solution that would protect my privacy, send a message, and keep my property safe from unwanted visitors. What did I do? Well, let's just say the HOA didn't get the access they were hoping for. I put something in place that would make them think twice about demanding anything ever again. But the question is, will it work? Or have I just stirred up a storm that's about to get a whole lot worse? Stick around for the full story. You won't believe what happens next. It all started a few weeks ago when I received a letter from the HOA. You know, one of those official notices that always feels like trouble. They were asking for a favor. They wanted the keys to my private gate. Apparently, they thought it would improve traffic flow in the neighborhood, something about avoiding a bottleneck on busy days. It sounded harmless at first, but the more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it seemed. My driveway was my private space. I paid for it, maintained it, and I wasn't about to let them just take over. At first, I thought about just ignoring their request, but then the phone calls started. First, it was just a polite reminder. Then it became more insistent, almost demanding. "We really need those keys," they'd say, like I was somehow obligated to help them out. They kept insisting it was for the greater good. But what about my privacy, my comfort? It felt like they were pushing me into a corner, expecting me to just roll over. I knew I couldn't just give in, but I also didn't want to cause trouble. But honestly, I was getting fed up. So I started thinking, what could I do that would make them think twice before ever asking for something like this again? That's when the idea hit me. I spent days thinking about the situation, weighing my options. I could try to reason with the HOA, but after everything they had said and how pushy they were, it felt like they wouldn't listen. And honestly, I didn't trust them to respect my boundaries. I started talking to neighbors, hoping someone might back me up. But surprise, not a single one of them was willing to stand up to the HOA. They either shrugged it off, too scared to rock the boat, or flat out said, "You're on your own with this one." That left me with no choice but to handle things myself. I had to think of a way to make my property off limits without just locking everything down. I didn't want to create more problems, but I also wasn't going to let anyone drive through my driveway whenever they felt like it. That's when I started looking into deterrence, something that would send a strong message but wouldn't be too extreme. I did some research, talked to a few experts, and eventually I came up with a plan. The thing was, I didn't want the HOA to know exactly what I was doing until it was too late. I knew if they had any idea of what I was planning, they'd try to stop it before it even began. So I had to work fast and keep it under wraps. The stakes were high. This could either be the solution I was looking for or backfire in a way I couldn't even imagine. But at that moment, I was ready to take the risk. The days leading up to the installation were a blur of preparations. I ordered the equipment, got everything I needed, and started setting it all up. But every step I took, the more nervous I became. What if the HOA found out? What if they tried to shut me down before I could even finish? My heart raced each time I saw one of the HOA board members walking around the neighborhood. They were watching me, I knew it. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like eyes were on me. I could tell they were growing more and more desperate for those keys, which only made me more determined to follow through. Then the day finally came. I had everything in place. The spikes were installed at strategic spots along the entrance to my driveway, hidden but effective. The plan was simple: create a barrier that was impossible to ignore without actually causing damage to anyone or anything. But as I stood there, staring at the setup, I felt a wave of doubt wash over me. Was I doing the right thing? I knew this was about to escalate, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the fallout, but it was too late to back out now. The tension was unbearable. That afternoon, I saw a few HOA cars drive by, slowing down as they passed my driveway. I could feel the moment building, like a storm that was about to break. Would they take the bait? Would they try to push for those keys again? My pulse quickened as I watched from my window, barely able to breathe, wondering what would happen next. The game was on, and there was no turning back now. The days leading up to the installation were a blur of preparations. I ordered the equipment, got everything I needed, and started setting it all up. But every step I took, the more nervous I became. What if the HOA found out? What if they tried to shut me down before I could even finish? My heart raced each time I saw one of the HOA board members walking around the neighborhood. They were watching me, I knew it. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like eyes were on me. I could tell they were growing more and more desperate for those keys, which only made me more determined to follow through. Then, the day finally came. I had everything in place. The spikes were installed at strategic spots along the entrance to my driveway, hidden but effective. The plan was simple: create a barrier that was impossible to ignore without actually causing damage to anyone or anything. But as I stood there, staring at the setup, I felt a wave of doubt wash over me. Was I doing the right thing? I knew this was about to escalate, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for the fallout, but it was too late to back out now. The tension was unbearable. That afternoon, I saw a few HOA cars drive by, slowing down as they passed my driveway. I could feel the moment building, like a storm that was about to break. Would they take the bait? Would they try to push for those keys again? My pulse quickened as I watched from my window, barely able to breathe, wondering what would happen next. The game was on, and there was no turning back now. Just when I thought I might finally catch a break, something unexpected happened. That evening, around dusk, I saw a strange car pull up in front of my house. It wasn't an HOA vehicle. This one was different. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows. I froze, my heart skipping a beat. Who could that be? My first thought was that they were there to check out my driveway, maybe to confront me about what I had done. But then something even more unsettling happened. The car sat there for a while, idling. No one got out, and no one moved. I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just an innocent visitor. I watched for what felt like hours, the tension in my chest growing tighter with every passing minute. Finally, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, the car slowly backed up and disappeared down the road. My pulse was racing. What was that all about? Had the HOA sent someone to keep an eye on me? Or was there something bigger going on that I didn't know about? The next day, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was an unfamiliar voice on the other end, and they weren't asking about the keys. Instead, they were asking about the spikes. Apparently, someone had noticed them, someone who wasn't just a neighbor or even part of the HOA. Now I had to wonder, who knew what I'd done, and how far was this going to escalate? The phone call left me feeling uneasy, my mind racing with questions. Who could have seen the spikes? And why were they calling me now? I had to face the reality that my actions were no longer a secret. I paced around the house, trying to make sense of it all when, just as I was about to go outside and check the driveway again, I saw a familiar face standing at my front door. It was one of the HOA board members, standing there, looking unusually calm. But I knew this wasn't a social visit. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice oddly gentle, almost too friendly. I didn't even try to hide my annoyance. "About what?" I said, trying to keep my cool. She explained that there had been a complaint, but it wasn't from any of the neighbors. It was from someone higher up in the neighborhood association. Apparently, they'd received an anonymous tip about what I'd done with the spikes. At first, I thought it was the HOA trying to intimidate me, but then she dropped a bombshell. "They weren't just upset about the spikes," she continued. "They were upset because they didn't get the chance to make you an offer. You see, there's been talk of buying up properties in this area, and yours was next on the list." I stood there stunned. Buying up properties. It wasn't just about traffic flow or convenience. They had been planning to take my land. I had never imagined the HOA could be involved in something like this. They weren't just after keys to my gate. They were after much more. But just as my shock began to settle, she gave me one last chilling piece of information. You think you've stopped them, but now they're watching you even closer. She turned to leave, but then paused, glancing over her shoulder. You'll have to be careful from now on. There's more at play here than you realize. As she walked away, I stood frozen, trying to wrap my head around everything she'd said. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined, and now I was left wondering just how deep this rabbit hole went. Was this really the end, or was I just about to find out how far this game would go? In the days that followed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every time I stepped outside, I half expected to see one of those black sedans or an HOA representative lurking nearby. But the truth was, I had already won. The HOA's plans to take over my property were out in the open now, and there was no way they could move forward without drawing too much attention. My little spike solution had turned into a much bigger stand against something I hadn't even fully understood until now. The weeks passed, and nothing more came of the HOA's attempts. They backed off, probably realizing that any more moves against me would only bring more unwanted attention. Word spread among the neighbors, and a few of them even came over to offer support, now that the truth was out. They hadn't wanted to get involved before, but once they saw that I wasn't just some easy target, they started paying more attention to the HOA's actions too. I realized that standing up for myself didn't just protect my privacy, it brought the whole neighborhood together. The entire ordeal made me realize something important. Never underestimate how far people will go to control things, but also never underestimate the power of standing your ground. I had turned the tables, not just for myself, but for everyone in the neighborhood, the HOA. They learned a valuable lesson. I wasn't someone to be pushed around. And that was the final, satisfying twist in the story.